But my guest this evening hasn't followed that trend, perhaps because of his ability over the years to turn his hand to other genres, styles and forms of music. You may remember him from the group that produced the hits West End Girls, Domino Dancing and It's a Sin. But the group, who's sold over 100 million records worldwide, have just completed a 4-year project to compose music for a brand new ballet. It's called The Most Incredible Thing, and it runs for just 12 performances from the 17th to the 26th of March. My guest this evening is one half of the Pet Shop Boys, Neil Tennant. So Neil, a journey from the Pet Shop to Sadler's Wells. How daunted are you by that prospect?
Well, we've done our bit now. We've finished writing the music and indeed recording it, the whole thing, and we delivered it right after Christmas. And since then, Javier de Frutos, who's the choreographer of The Most Incredible Thing, it was passed on to him, and it's he's the one under pressure now, and it's a big thing. You know, they aim to choreograph, I've discovered in ballet, 1 minute a day, and I think this is 84 minutes, and they started in the beginning of January, so he's just doing the final stuff now. I was in there yesterday. It's exciting when you go in and you see someone dancing, all the dancers dancing to our music, and you see that you think it works. We always like a creative collaboration. This is very much a collaboration. It's Javier's ballet, as much if not more than ours, and so it's down to him.
And the genesis of this is Ivan Putrov from the Royal Ballet contacted, I understand, you.
Yes, we got to know Ivan Putrov when he was a principal dancer at the Royal Ballet because of our friend Sam Taylor-Wood, the artist and filmmaker. And she, many years ago, did a load of photographs of the Royal Ballet for their promotional stuff. And we met Ivan at some party, and Ivan used to invite us to go and see him dance at the Royal Ballet. And Chris and I became very interested by the traditional classic ballet of Swan Lake, Giselle, Romeo and Juliet, you know, the sort of classic repertoire. And then, a few years ago, Ivan phoned me up and said, would we consider writing some music for a short ballet, because he'd been offered a little slot at Sadler's Wells. And I said, I don't know, maybe, I'll ask Chris. And actually, to be honest, I forgot about it. And then, by incredible coincidence, 2 days later, Chris Lowe phoned me up and said, I've been reading this new book of Hans Christian Andersen's stories, and there's a great story called The Most Incredible Thing, and I think it would make a great ballet. And I just said to him, well, that's an amazing coincidence, because Ivan phoned up 2 days ago and said we'd write a ballet for him. And so a few weeks later we were sitting with Sadler's Wells, and The Most Incredible Thing, I think the reason Chris thought of it as an idea for a ballet is because when you go and see Swan Lake, you know, it's got a sort of profound underlying plot and theme. It also has a structure that allows for different styles of dancing. It's a classic 3-act ballet, and the fantasy sequences in the middle. And The Most Incredible Thing, which is not a famous Hans Christian Andersen story, but it's a very profound one, that the king says, whoever comes up with the most incredible thing will marry the princess and get half the kingdom. And a guy comes up with this amazing clock, which is like the whole universe, and everyone says that's the most incredible thing. And just as he's going to marry the princess, another guy comes along and destroys it, and everyone says, no, that's the most incredible thing. And he's going to marry the princess, but then all the characters and ideas represented by the clock rise up and stifle the bad guy, and so it has a happy ending. And this seemed like a very good structure for a ballet.
But it was a very short story, even as has been written by Andersen standards. It's 3 pages.
It is, and so, it's 3 acts now.
So a lot of this you have just had to take from your own mind and explore all sorts of different areas to generate this much material.
Well, Sadler's Wells had a very good idea. They brought in what they call a dramaturg, which is essentially a playwright, called Matthew Dunster, and we sat down with Matthew, and Matthew produced what he called a map for music, which was like a 20-page synopsis, and we turned the characters in the short story into maybe more fleshed out characters. We also discussed, like nowadays, the very fact that the story of the princess has to marry whoever becomes the most incredible thing is kind of, it's like an arranged marriage, or it's a bit sexist or something. And so in the ballet, the princess is very, very, very reluctant about this, and she's angry. She's a lot of anger in her. And so these characters were, and the bad guy who destroys the incredible thing, who's called Karl in the ballet, who's played by Ivan Putrov. His character has been very much fleshed out as well. In fact, if you look at Andersen's story, it's a bit like the pitch for a film, in that it's all there, but it's incredibly concise. and it's there to be fleshed out.
So this leads us neatly to one of your selections, Neil, which is some ballet, more traditional ballet, if you will, from Prokofiev, Romeo and Juliet.
Really, all the great ballet composers are Russian. Tchaikovsky, Stravinsky, Prokofiev. And this is a really, really famous piece of music from Romeo and Juliet. But it's an incredible piece of dance music. They do, in one choreography anyway, they do this amazing dance where they stamp on the beat, and it's really, really exciting.
And my guest this evening on Classic FM, Neil Tennant, has just completed writing the music to the Pet Shop Boys' first ballet. Neil, perhaps the most incredible thing about The Most Incredible Thing is that it was actually featured in the Danish resistance movement in World War II.
Yes, well, of course, Hans Christian Andersen's Danish. In World War II, Denmark, of course, was occupied by the Nazis, and the Danish resistance printed a special version of The Most Incredible Thing.
What was it that encouraged what is it in there, do you suppose?
It was a propaganda leaflet, because the story of The Most Incredible Thing is that you can destroy the physical manifestation of an idea, of a beautiful idea, and you can be very impressed by that destruction, but you can't kill the idea. You can only kill the manifestation of it. And in Nazi-occupied Copenhagen, the idea was Denmark and maybe democracy, and the destroyers, the very impressive blitzkrieg destroyers, were the Germans. But the hope was that the freedom would come back, because they may have been under Nazi occupation, but they couldn't kill the idea. And of course, the Nazi occupation didn't last, and the idea won. So it's the same, it's a parable for that particular situation.
Take you back a few years, perhaps a few more than you care to remember. Were you a fan of Hans Christian Andersen, or those kind of fairy tales and that sort of illusion and imaginative story?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I've always read a lot, and so I read every book was lying around. And I discovered once in the attic, my father had a load of books he had when he was a kid, and they were very nice editions, and they'd had Hans Christian Andersen and Alice in Wonderland, I think Grimm's fairy tales. So I read them all, yeah, when I was probably about 9 or 10 years old.
And what's been the most challenging aspect for you of doing The Most Incredible Thing?
The challenging aspect was really seeing if we could do it. It's such a different thing from writing pop songs. We did, a few years ago, a soundtrack for the film Battleship Potemkin, the silent film, and that was, a very long, extended piece of music. So we built on what we learned from that. But, putting into music what is happening in the scenes, knowing that people have to dance to it, working out what the themes mean, and they come back later, and producing this kind of unified work, was an amazing challenge, but a very satisfying thing when we'd written the last note, and you could listen back to this, and it sort of seemed to make sense.
How are you going to feel on the first night? Do criticism get to you?
Yeah. Weirdly, in pop music, it doesn't really get to me. There's a tradition in Britain that, you'll get slagged off by the enemy or something, and so you're kind of hardened to it. A few years ago, 10 years ago, we did a musical called Closer to Heaven. And we
had a short run, didn't
it? Well, it was on for 5 months, but it would have been it was meant to be on for a year.
Did that hurt?
What hurt was that I actually thought it was a pretty good show. It's flawed, but the music's very good, and and the script is hilariously funny and then very dark. And I think we were doing something new, because we were doing something that was really quite outrageous on purpose, and also we were trying to portray the club scene of the 90s, the gay club scene of the 90s, on the stage. And actually we did it quite accurately. And I think it was too much for people. I think people expect you to have a sort of great celebration of this, and in fact it was too in your face or something for people, and we did, and it did hurt actually. And also sometimes you feel, if you come into the theatre from outside, there's a bit of hostility.
Well, let's hear something from The Most Incredible Thing. We're going to hear some of the music now.
The middle act of this is The Most Incredible Thing, which is this incredible clock, and this is the clock striking 2 and 3, and what you see on the stage, Adam is the start of human life. He's joined by Eve, and they dance together, and on 3, the clock strikes 3, you get the sun, the moon and the stars.
I'm talking with Neil Tennant. So, Neil, you talk about being a little bit of an outsider with your West End show, Closer to Heaven. You're in ballet now. Your music was certainly very different. Do you suppose you've got the awkward gene?
Yeah, we both have the awkward gene. Chris and I both have that. We never do things the easy way. We never have done.
What's that down to?
I think it's down to wanting to do things our way, because otherwise what you do will get watered down. And we were very aware of this in the 80s, that we didn't want to just turn into some sort of show businessy pop duo. We had our own agenda of things we wanted to do, the kind of music we wanted to do. We always wanted to bring things into pop music from outside. On our second album, we wrote a song with Ennio Morricone, for instance. We always wanted to do the theatrical show thing, and we didn't tour till we could afford to do that. And I suppose you could say it's about integrity or something, but also it's just about on the occasions where you have to do things you don't want to do, you don't necessarily feel good about it, and you feel it weakens what we are. And I think if we hadn't done things our way, we would have faded away. We wouldn't be here anymore.
Are you easy to work with, the two of you?
I think we are reasonably easy to work with.
How have you matured over the years? Is it about 4 decades you've been together now, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we met in 1981.
Yeah.
How many years is that? 30 years.
You're in your 4th decade, yeah.
Well, we get on together as personalities. And also, we've both been through this extraordinary experience where we started off writing songs as sort of a hobby and ended up, selling a lot of records and all that thing. In some ways, I don't think we've changed at all, actually. I mean, when we started, when we had our first hit, I was 31, and I worked for 10 years in publishing. Chris was a qualified architect by that point. But in other ways, I think we've become slightly more relaxed about the way we go about things, slightly more secure, maybe a little less precious, but as I say, we still keep to the core of what we want to do.
And you've handled fame, if there is such an expression, you've handled it very well. Is that a product of the fact that you were that little bit older, little bit wiser, and indeed you'd been a journalist and in publishing when you finally found it?
It is a little bit, but also it's to do with the kind of people we are. We didn't come into this to be famous. If I'd become a pop star when I was 17, I might have been very different. But neither Chris or I sought the trappings of the pop star thing, and we didn't really have the personalities for that either. I don't think we have those sort of star personalities, because sometimes you get all that attention whether you want it or not. And also we made a sort of decision early on to sort of not lie low, but to try and to not let it affect our lives, to walk places, to get public transport, to not get cut off from what goes on the street.
All of which the idea of being stars at 17 or 18 leads me into shows such as X Factor. How do you regard those?
I think they're television rather than music.
Does good music ever come out of them?
I think good singers do. What worries me is a very conservative idea of music. Music doesn't progress because of X Factor. They're very entertaining, It always amazes me that Top of the Pops isn't on the television, although this is a classic old rocker complaint, but Top of the Pops is a reality TV show that's voted for every week by the public on record sales, or now it'd be on download sales, all the rest of it. I don't see why they don't bring it back and sort of... One thing you can learn from X Factor is it's not cynical. A lot of the music television has developed a tone of sort of world-weary cynicism, or indeed, certainly towards the end of Top of the Pops. X Factor gives, everyone's 110%. And I think there's something you can learn from that uncynical presentation.
What about something like Britain's Got Talent? Do you ever watch something like that?
Not really. I think Susan Boyle's story is a pretty amazing one, though. We actually asked Susan Boyle to perform at Glastonbury with us last year. We thought she could sing the dusty part on What Have I Done to Deserve This? And actually her management company considered it for quite a long time. We just thought it would be an amazing thing, Susan Boyle at Glastonbury. And she's got a great voice. And also you can see she's got a love of music. It may not be my type of music all the time, but she's got a genuine connection with the music she sings.
But I've got to ask, why didn't it happen?
The management thought she might not feel comfortable.
Okay.
And actually, when we got to Glastonbury, I thought they were right, because actually, if you've never been to one of those, to that sort of setting, I don't suppose she has, maybe she might have found it a bit weird.
The second movement from Ravel's Piano Concerto, played by Marta Argerich, with Claudio Abbado directing the Berlin Philharmonic. A favourite of my guest this evening, one half of the Pet Shop Boys, Neil Tennant.
The Classic FM interview with Nick Ferrari.
In association with Range Rover, the world's most capable luxury vehicle.
Neil, we've talked a little bit about your teenage years. You went to the Catholic Grammar School in Newcastle upon Tyne. What did you have your heart set on back then?
Well, when I was 17, I used to go around Newcastle telling everyone I was going to be a pop star. And my first group, I got a guitar when I was 12 years old. But even when I was younger than that, I used to make up songs in my head. When I was 9, I wrote a musical called The Girl Who Pulled Tails, about a girl who went around pulling the tails of cats and dogs and got into trouble for it. And we performed it in this girl's back garden to an audience of 4 neighbours. And I got a guitar when I was 12, and I taught myself to play the guitar, and then I taught myself to play the piano by working out the guitar chords on the piano. And then I was in a folk group and a couple of other groups of friends in Newcastle. But I took songwriting from the age of 16 very seriously. So by the time I met Chris Lowe, when I was 27, I'd been writing songs for about 13 or 14 years.
How easy was it attending a Catholic school with those sort of ambitions?
It wasn't really the Catholic thing. It was a slightly authoritarian school. This was in the 60s. They used to have things like hair checks. You used to get lined up, and if your hair touched your collar, you would be suspended and things like that.
Were you a rebel?
Yeah, I was a rebel in a different way. Sting, who went to the same school as me, 3 years above me, Sting and I was a long conversation. He told me he got caned about 40 times. I was never caned once. But in the 6th form, I used to skive off, I would supposedly go off to school, and I would actually meet my friends in the middle of Newcastle, and because I was just fed up with it. And also, I've never been a sort of sporty person. It was a very sort of football-y kind of school, and it just wasn't my kind of thing. At the same time, I had a very good history teacher. It's always been my big subject, history, and also we had a good music teacher. I used to go and sit in the music room and teach myself to play the piano, and even write songs there. So, there were good aspects as well. How
important is the right teacher? So much emphasis at the moment on education and the funding of education. If you get the right teacher to unlock a subject, it can be an incredible experience.
It is. I mean, I was always interested in history anyway, so I didn't take a lot of unlocking, but he was a very good teacher. And also we had a very good English teacher. Actually, funny enough, Sting and I both had the same English teacher in different years, who was called Mr. McGough. He was about 6'4" tall, so obviously he was called Tiny McGough. And he was a very strange character, but he was quite inspirational about literature.
Also, it's been reported you got a love, possibly from your English teacher, T.S. Eliot, Betjeman.
Yeah, they're not actually from the English teacher, they're just from reading. I love The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. I read it and I didn't understand a word of it, but what fascinated me was the different voices in it, the way it's a sort of collage of different voices. And when I wrote the lyrics for West End Girls, I was thinking of the same technique of having different voices coming in and out of it, even though it's all spoken by me.
You mentioned West End Girls. The lyrics to It's a Sin, that was a rebellion, wasn't it, against the school?
It's interesting when you write a song what comes out of your subconscious, and It's a Sin was written very quickly, but it's definitely about St. Cuthbert's. I mean, we were taught that any sexual contact of any kind was a sin, and this is at an age where, young people are thinking about that. I remember once a priest telling us there's a form of kissing that is a direct simulation of the sexual act itself. I was taught this when I was 15, and we all thought, wow. Because we realised he just meant kissing, really, French kissing, to give it an old-fashioned term. And it's funny, I've never forgotten that. And it made the idea seem frightfully exciting.
Was it difficult because you're coming to terms with your sexuality, was it difficult being in a Catholic school?
Yeah. I think people were aware I was gay before I was aware that I was gay. Because actually, but boys are very strange at that age. I used to get called a puff because I knew girls. And boys thought this was very strange, to know girls as friends, not just as sort of...
You should be playing rugger and breaking wind in the showers, presumably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I knew these girls who I still know from who went to the local girls' Catholic grammar school, and they used to meet me outside. And they were all very pretty and sort of glamorous, and they used to take the mickey out of the boys as their husbands. And everyone was sort of amazed that Tennant was being met by these girls, and this made everyone very suspicious.
Neil, why does Vaughan Williams remind you of those school days?
I remember when I was about 12, we used to have music lessons in the sort of assembly hall at school, and the music teacher one day used to play us music, and one day he said he was going to play a piece of British music, and he put on this record, and it was Fantasia on a Theme by Thomas Tallis, by Vaughan Williams, and I was just amazed by the sound of it. I was used to Beethoven and stuff like that, and Bach and what have you, but the sort of depth of the harmonies and the sort of eeriness of it had a profound effect on me.
This is the Classic FM interview, and tonight I'm speaking with Neil Tennant. So, Neil, you had a religious schooling. Tell me, do you have a faith now?
No, I don't think I do now.
Did you ever?
Yeah, when I was a little boy, I wanted to be a priest. I was very religious. My parents very sensibly said, why don't you go to grammar school first and then see if you still want to be a priest? Of course, I didn't. By the end of that, I wanted to be a pop star. Although I think there was a theatrical thing. We had a parish priest in Newcastle who was unusual. He was English. Many Catholic priests are traditionally Irish in Britain. And he'd been an army chaplain. And he'd been in the Far East during the war. And he had this wardrobe full of vestments made in China and Singapore and Burma, where the Virgin Mary had Chinese eyes. And I was always really fascinated by this kind of theatrical style. That was the thing about Catholicism to this day. I like some of the music and that sort of grand style and all the rest of it. It's incredibly theatrical. And I was an altar boy and I was 7, which is a very young age, and I was involved in the theatricality of incense and hymns and vestments and all the rest of it. And it leaves an effect on you that survives the lack of faith, actually.
So you're incredibly busy man. How do you relax, or do you not enjoy relaxing?
Oh no, I like relaxing a lot.
What do you do?
I have a place in the countryside. I like walking in the country. I just like hanging out with friends in London. I like reading. I like listening to music. I listen to a lot of classical music, probably more than I listen to pop music nowadays. But I've always listened to a lot of classical music, actually. I've always been influenced a bit by, or would like to be influenced by classical music.
Did classical music inform any of the work you did with Chris, do you think?
Yes, I think it has done. I think Chris is influenced by classical music too. I mean, Chris is quite a good musician. He did A-level music and all the rest of it. And so we've both been influenced. I like the melodies of classical music as well. But also I like the depth of harmony you get. That's why I like that Vaughan Williams piece.
Yeah.
And I like modern classical music as well.
So what next for Neil Tennant?
What next is, it's the ballet. But after that, we're starting to write songs for a new album. And we're not under any pressure about that. So we've had a very busy 5 years, really. We did our album Fundamental with Trevor Horn, and then we went on tour. And then we pretty much immediately went into doing the next album with producer Xenomania, and then we immediately went on tour with that Pandemonium tour, which is only just finished, and then simultaneously we were doing the ballet. So now we're sort of casually writing pop songs and taking it slightly easier.
You once said words to the effect of you didn't perhaps sell sex for yourself enough, and that might have held you back, but you and Chris are one of the real stayers from your generation of pop stars. Why is that? I
think it's because the Pet Shop Boys has always been a creative project. It's never just been about commerciality, or that's not to say, we like commercial music. We're lucky, I think, that we like commercial music, but I think it's always been a creative project. Right from the beginning, we had the idea that we would create our own world that might have references to what was happening outside it, but gradually this universe of the Pet Shop Boys, which might encompass Dusty Springfield and Liza Minnelli in writing a ballet and Battleship Potemkin and Trevor Horn, and would sort of come together. And that's still the project we're working on.
You've mentioned Dusty a couple of times. Obviously, huge affection for the late, great Dusty Springfield. Yeah. What was it? Was it the voice or the person or just the whole?
It was the voice. When you grew up in the 60s, We never even owned any Dusty's records, but you didn't need to because it was on the radio. I mean, I didn't really buy a Dusty record till the end of the 70s. They were always repackaging them anyway, but Greatest Hits came out, and I was just struck with an incredible, Dusty Springfield's 20 Greatest Hits is an astonishing body of work. And then I went deeper into it. And when we wrote this duet, Well, We Don't Deserve This, she was our choice. Because we just thought it was an underused resource, if you like, this incredible voice languishing in Los Angeles and not being used. And people told us she couldn't sing when she came to the studio and she sang this. It was so amazing, and so amazing to have that sound on your own record. It's really one of the things I feel most proud about that we've done.
In 50 years' time, when Neil Tennant decides to move to another world, leaves this planet, what piece of music should be played to remember him by, lastly?
Being Boring by the Pet Shop Boys, because it says we were never being boring, and it's sort of a funny line, but at the same time, it's what we set out.
The priesthood's loss was the gain of the world of pop music, ballet, theatre, and everything else. Neil Tennant, thanks for your time this evening.
Thanks, Nick. It was great.